Good evening to everyone. Welcome to 123 Mental Health Series. Our today's topic is lifestyle strategies and natural therapies for mental health. Dr. Michelle Davila, who is a licensed naturopathic doctor with Beaumont Integrative Medicine in Royal Oak, will talk about lifestyle strategies and natural therapies that support mental health. Mental health is influenced by a variety of factors, including lifestyle, relationships, environment, genetics, life history, and current circumstances. We are fortunate to have the ability to influence many of these factors. In this presentation, Dr. Michelle Davila will talk more about ways that we can support our own well-being through simple everyday habits and skills that can be improved through practice, nutrition, and more. We will be recording this program and we'll post it on our library's YouTube page for you people to view it again. If you have any questions, please use our question answers feature or chat feature. And also at the end of the program, Dr. Davila will answer all your questions. Now I will hand it over to her. Thank you very much, Dr. Davila, and welcome to our program. And all our patrons are eagerly waiting for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Uma. And thanks everybody for joining. I'm excited to be here. And yeah, like Uma said, I'm going to be presenting on lifestyle strategies and natural therapies to support mental health. So it sounds like there's a great lineup of speakers and topics for the mental health awareness this year. And so I kind of consider this one to be a little bit of a general overview of kind of what are some of the foundational things that we can do to support our mental health and our overall well-being. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, great. So all right, I will just get started. So I know that one of my colleagues, Dr. Uma, presented last month. Some of you might have been here, but just to give you a little bit of a background from the perspective from which I'm speaking. I'm a naturopathic doctor, which is an integrative medicine or kind of a holistic approach to medicine. And with integrative medicine, we're really trying to integrate the conventional allopathic approach. So kind of, your standard DOs and MDs and specialists and supportive staff. So kind of the typical medical care that most people get in this country with a more natural and holistic approach. So we're really looking to combine the two worlds. And so here at Beaumont, these are some of the different modalities or methods that we use to support people in their health. So we have acupuncture and clinical massage. We have integrative medicine, MD medical doctors, naturopathic medicine, which is what I do. We have yoga therapist, Reiki, which is another kind of energetic healing technique. We have an integrative nutritionist, and then we also have an herb and supplement pharmacy. We carry pharmaceutical grade supplements. So just an overview of our services. And in terms of, what I'll talk about today, I'll start out just with different perspectives on well-being because mental health is a huge aspect of it, but just to kind of put that in context, and then talk a little bit about with the pandemic, some of the effects that it's had on our mental health, and then just a brief overview of the stress response, because that is sort of a really puts it in context, I guess, in terms of how I think a lot about some of, applying these lifestyle strategies and how they help. And it's kind of nice to know, what I'm talking about with the stress response. And then we'll kind of get into the just the overall presentation looking at the lifestyle strategies and natural therapies. And then there are some resources at the end, and I'll also take questions at the end. So this is, there's so many different ways to illustrate or describe overall health and well-being. This is just one way. This is from the University of Arizona Integrative Medicine Department, which is one of the biggest integrative medicine departments in the country and educates a lot of the physicians and allied healthcare professionals in integrative medicine. And I think it's, interesting because we're talking about mental health, and mental health, you can see, is sort of right at the center of the circle. And so all of these different aspects of well-being really interact with mental health. And so overall health is kind of, seen, this is individual overall health, is seen as an interplay between different factors. So it's not only, the conventional treatment that we receive, but, also kind of going around clockwise. It's also our sleep and the mind-body connection, which is really, how do our thoughts and emotions influence the physical body, and then vice versa? How does the physical body and physical symptoms influence our mental health? Dietary supplements can be a part of it. It's, not something that everybody has to take, but it could be a part of overall health. Spirituality, how we connect to maybe something greater than ourselves, and sort of how we relate to the world. Nutrition, what we eat and how we nourish ourselves with food. Exercise, how we move, and then social connections. And so all of these are very important for overall health. And then, yes, you can see again, mental health is right in the center. And I think it's important and useful to look at this perspective on individual health. I also think I always like to mention too that individual health, so kind of, what we just talked about, is also within the context of other types of health, interplay with other types of institutions or organizations. So your individual health is also influenced by organizational health. So that's, if you work outside of the home, it's the, maybe your workplace, or what types of organizations you're involved with, maybe, your spiritual community or social community. So how does the health of that organization and its practices influence our individual health? And then also societal. So there are a lot of social determinants of health as well. Where we're born, our zip code determines some estimates up to 60% of our overall health outcomes and risk. And so people that are living in more affluent, resource-dense areas are, typically going to have more opportunities than people living with less resources. And so I think it's important just to mention that, although I won't go into it in detail in this talk, because this talk is really more about individual health and how we can care for ourselves. But I always think it's useful just to put that in context. So in terms of how the pandemic has affected our mental health, I don't think, really anybody needs to see a lot of these statistics, but it's, still useful just to see that it is being studied, and it is recognized as a huge issue, and really it's being called a crisis, a mental health crisis. So, and really this is something that's been going on for a long time. I think that the pandemic has really just, laid bare some of these conditions and exacerbated them. So a study, this was from last year in 2021, but 1/3 of Americans are feeling severe anxiety. 1/4 are showing at least some signs of depression, and the pandemic has negatively affected the mental health of at least 56% of adults, and almost half of people, 42% of people, reported feeling hopeless at least one day in the prior week. So it's definitely serious. And just to, kind of give some understanding of invalidation of, why people are feeling this. A lot of mental health professionals are kind of correlating, some of the symptoms and conditions that people are experiencing, anxiety, depression, very common, as well as chronic fatigue, and sort of correlating them to certain aspects of what's going on in our lives and how our lives have changed with the pandemic. So when there's a lot of uncertainty, or we feel like we don't have much agency or control over what happens to us, or our values are threatened, we're not able to socialize and interact in the same way with our family and our community as we did before, that can create anxiety. Depression can be related to different types of loss, whether it's, actual loss of somebody's life, or even feeling like we're not as connected to people, or our community, also financial loss. And then with fatigue, it's, we're juggling so many different demands. People are working from home and parenting, and schools are, opening and closing, and we're having to really make decisions, new decisions every day, even now. And, new things are coming up, and that creates a lot of mental fatigue and also physical fatigue. So just to kind of briefly go over stress, because these are major stressors. And so it's good to just have an understanding of what stress is, because I think a lot of people assume that it's something that's just happening in the mind and it doesn't affect the body. But there's, definitely physiological, measurable effects of stress on the body. So we know that stress is a major underlying risk factor for both acute, so kind of short term, whether it's injury or illness, and also chronic illness. So chronic illnesses, things more like autoimmune disease or heart disease, diabetes, chronic pain, things like that. So a couple different perspectives on stress. The pioneering researcher in the stress response in humans was Hans Selye, who wrote about a lot of this in the 1930s or so. And so he saw stress as really being this kind of unifying factor that showed how chronic illness is related to the stress response in terms of a chronic stress response. So there's an acute stress response, which is something that happens in the short term when we need to respond to an immediate threat. And then there's also this chronic stress response, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But and another one, which I think is nice to see, is Lazarus and Folkman. They define stress as a transaction between a person and their environment that is appraised as taxing or exceeding their resources and endangering their well-being. So I think that that's useful to consider, because the same stressor, whether it's needing to adapt to a new lifestyle or a job change or loss of a family member, for one person, this may really be difficult to handle, and it may feel very threatening to their well-being, and really feeling like they don't have the resources to respond to that. Whereas the next person, they might feel that they are able to respond to the stressor, and they have enough resources that it doesn't feel like it's very endangering to their well-being. So there are a lot of these things that we'll talk about today. Can also increase what a lot of people will call resiliency, which is basically how do we build up our inner resources so that, even though we have these stresses, we're able to adapt, and they don't have as much negative impact on our health. So this is a little bit of a, just sort of an illustration of how stress affects us physically and physiologically. So an environmental stressor comes in, so that could be an illness or an infection. It could be an injury that we experience, or a car crash. So it it could be something like that. It could also be, this diagram says an environmental stressor, but it could also be something from within the body. It could be pain or physical symptoms, or it could also be ruminative thoughts or anxiety or depression that is stressing. And so, but basically the stressor comes in, and the first place that it goes is the brain, and it activates a part of the brain called the limbic system, which has to do with emotion processing, also our arousal and how we respond to the environment, and also memories. And so that really starts off this cascade where it then releases hormones into the bloodstream that go down and stimulate the adrenal glands, which are these two little glands on top of the kidneys. And those glands then release other hormones, namely epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are also called adrenaline and noradrenaline. And those are the ones where, we feel this immediate response. We feel like our heart is racing, we're sweating, and it's, a response that happens pretty quickly. So it's, probably most of us have felt that if we almost fell or almost had an accident, or we, hear some bad news or something like that. That's the epinephrine and norepinephrine. And then cortisol is a hormone that is also released, but it's kind of on a longer time scale. And it's the one that is more responsible for this chronic stress response. So the epinephrine and norepinephrine are released, but then they subside fairly quickly, whereas the cortisol stays elevated for a longer period of time before it comes down. And if we aren't able to recover from that stressful event before the cortisol goes down, then it can stay elevated kind of chronically. And so we can kind of end up in this sort of chronic stress response that can have a lot of negative impacts on the body. And so in the short term, in addition to, sort of readying our body to respond to this stress, and it's going to send blood to our brain and our heart and our lungs and our muscles to help us respond to a stressor. And that's very adaptive and very beneficial for us. It's also going to shut down other systems, like it's going to shut down digestion and our growth and reproduction, because when we're responding to this, acute life-threatening situation, we don't need to be digesting, and we don't need to be thinking about reproduction. And so these are all very adaptive responses, but you can see that if this is going to be persisting long-term, there can be effects of stress on our digestive tract, on our hormones, our growth and reproduction. It can also influence blood sugar levels and inflammation levels in the body. So that's just, kind of a brief overview of stress. And I put this this figure in here. I'm not going to spend way too much time, just, in the interest of time and wanting to make sure I get to the different aspects of, how to support ourselves to, better adapt and handle. But this kind of just goes into some more detail. This is from a book called Full Catastrophe Living, and it's a book about the stress response and mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is something I'll touch on later and also talk about next month in my talk. But it's kind of showing the same thing, just in more detail. And then at the bottom, it also kind of goes into some of the, other consequences, in addition to, some of these physical symptoms that we can get, high blood pressure or sleep disorders or chronic pain, chronic headaches. We also can then develop maladaptive coping mechanisms, which are basically behaviors that are going to help us to feel better in the moment, but that aren't necessarily conducive to health and well-being in the long term. And so those are things like, how do different people respond to stress differently? Some people, put all of their energy towards work, and they, sort of the quote unquote workaholic. People that are busy all the time, that's another way to cope with stress, so that, we don't have to think about it. Overeating or substance dependency, these are all things that that are, some of these maladaptive coping mechanisms. And then those in turn can feed back, and those actually create more stress in the body. That's why they're maladaptive. And so it just kind of continues to feed this response. And over time, in that bottom right where it says breakdown, we are basically then at a point where the body can't adapt any longer. That's what the allostatic overload that it says is basically. It's just referring to the fact that the body has had to cope and adapt and change to stressors for so long that it really can't physically sustain that. And so we might develop chronic fatigue or depression or burnout, and really our genetic predisposition is going to influence that. So somebody that has a strong family history of heart disease, they might end up developing more heart related issues, or somebody that has a family history of autoimmune disease, that stress might trigger an autoimmune condition in them. So this is kind of sort of the risks of the stress response. And so what we'll talk about for the rest of the talk is kind of how do we counter that? How do we prevent it from happening in the first place? How do we lessen the impact of the stress on our body, so that and also how do we process it more effectively so that it isn't as damaging? And so one way is the relaxation response, which is really that stress response is called the fight or flight response a lot of the time, or the sympathetic nervous system. And so this is kind of the opposite. It's called rest and digest, or the parasympathetic nervous system. And it's kind of the antidote to the stress response. And it's really thought to be kind of the common pathway of a lot of these mind-body therapies. So things that we'll talk about in for the rest of the talk, but it really has the ability to intercept this stress response, both at the level of the anxiety itself, for example, or the maladaptive thoughts. It can help to calm those, and then it can also calm the nervous system itself to then prevent worse symptoms, and then worse anxiety. And it has the potential to interact in a couple of ways to help us. So how do we do that? How do we support the relaxation response, and how do we restore a healthy stress response? Because it's not as though we don't want any stress, and we, or stress response, I should say. We need that stress response in order to survive. And if we don't have it, we wouldn't survive. And so how do we restore it to be healthy and respond to stressors when we need it to, but then be able to recover and return to baseline more quickly? So the things that we'll talk about are social connection, sleep, different types of movement, time in nature, mindfulness, and laughter. And then at the end, I'll also talk about some other natural therapies that can be used. So in terms of social connection, there is a lot of research about the negative health impacts of low social connection. So people that feel lonely or don't have a lot of connection with people that they are able to identify with, don't feel like they have meaningful relationships. And some studies have equated low social connection to equal to or more harmful than things like smoking 15 cigarettes a day, or alcoholism, or a sedentary lifestyle, which just means not being active, or obesity. And so it's, this is also the ability for us to connect socially has been interfered with related to the pandemic. So whatever we're able to do, making small connections, and paying attention to those interactions, and really being grateful and feeling that in our body, paying attention and being there when we're able to connect. Any little thing daily, even if it's somebody at the store or a coworker, so things that feel personal and meaningful to you, and different creative ways. We've become so creative with the pandemic, and I know that, we, at least, I and a lot of my colleagues, we will complain a lot about, Zoom or doing so much online, but it's also really offered us so many opportunities to connect with people and people that we might not have otherwise connected with, people from different parts of the country or different parts of the world. Sleep. So sleep is one of my favorite topics to talk about. I actually have a whole class on sleep for the community coming up next month. So I'd be happy to talk about that if people are interested. But I do talks on, hour-long talks on sleep. So just briefly, I think some of the things about sleep that are important in terms of our mental health. So sleep is a time when the body is in that rest and digest state. So it's able to repair and regenerate. And we know that we're learning more and more that, yes, the neurotransmitters like serotonin and the different brain chemicals are very important for mental health, but we're learning more and more that inflammation is a big factor as well in mental illness. And so if the body, especially the brain and the central nervous system, isn't able to repair itself and recover from inflammation that's happening, that's definitely going to negatively impact our mental health. We know that it's also a time of processing of emotions during sleep. A lot of people say, it's like maybe there's a problem or something going on, some, emotional stress. We sleep the next day, the edge is kind of taken off a little bit. So we might see new ways of responding, or it might just, not feel so heavy. And that is because sleep is a time when we process emotions and consolidate memories as well. So it's important for cognitive health too. And then waste removal. So it was a study almost 10 years ago now that was a pretty groundbreaking scientific discovery where they found that during sleep, the spaces in between the cells open up and the flow of a lymphatic fluid, which is just one of the fluids in our bodies, increases in between the cells, and it helps to remove waste from the brain. And that includes things like a particle called amyloid beta that's associated with Alzheimer's disease, but also, dementia and cognitive decline. And so we know that during sleep, that is removed, and it's kind of a time when the brain can kind of, clean itself. And so if we aren't sleeping well, we can have, a variety of different health impacts. Some of the main ones are our immune system function can decline, making us more susceptible to infections. The metabolism is affected. So when we have consistently less than about 5 or 6 hours of sleep per night, the body will sort of shift into more of like a pre-diabetic state almost. We lose the ability to really manage our blood sugars very well. And so anyone that has blood sugar issues and isn't sleeping well, that's definitely an opportunity for supporting blood sugar. And then inflammation, we talked about that, and mood, we talked about that. So just some, really simple tips for supporting our sleep. I think a routine is really important. So that is not only a routine day to day, like for example, going to bed and waking up at the same time every day. That's going to be very supportive, as well as having a routine before bed. So kind of, doing similar types of things every evening or most evenings before bed, an hour before bed or so. All of these things are going to be like little signals to the body, reminding it that yes, it's time to get ready to sleep. Part of what could be helpful in the routine, some things are things like journaling or reflection, especially if, you feel like the mind is racing at night. Sometimes writing things down before bed can be really helpful, or even taking time to reflect during the day can be very beneficial. Another thing is, or, even like breathing exercises or guided meditations. And then if you take a bath or a shower, having sort of like a warm bath or shower before bed, that's going to increase the body temperature a little bit and dilate the blood vessels. And then as we go into sleep, one of the signals for our body to fall asleep is a little bit of a drop in the body temperature. And so if we're already warm from a bath or shower, that's going to sort of just support that transition from warm to cool. It's going to be a more kind of obvious change, and that's going to trigger the body to want to sleep as well. Having exposure to adequate light in the morning, and it's, for people that aren't going outside in the morning, like we're not going to work, for example, maybe we're working from home, that is a change for a lot of people. Even walking to the car and walking to work was a time to have some light exposure. So if we're able to, go outside in the morning for at least like 15 to 20 minutes before noon, that helps to support the circadian rhythm. And then darkness at night, both when we are sleeping, if we can sleep in a dark room, and then also if we're able to have some darkness or dimmer lights in the hour or two before bed. And so that could also involve, like an orange or red tinted light that isn't going to change our melatonin levels quite as much. It's going to allow the body to do all of its natural processes of getting ready for sleep. But even just a dim light would help. And then, of course, all of the typical things that most people are aware of: managing caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, other substances, other drugs that can affect the sleep. Avoiding cardiovascular exercise within 3 hours of sleep would be ideal, just because that is a bit of it's a time when the body is going into a little bit of a stress response, which is adaptive in that case. But for some people, especially people that have difficulty falling asleep, that might be a little too stimulating. Avoiding high glycemic foods before sleep, that just means foods that are going to kind of spike the blood sugar. So that's anything that's kind of more sugary or carbohydrate rich, but carbohydrates without fiber and fat. So sometimes even having like a more protein rich snack in the evening, depending, for some people, avoiding eating within about 3 hours of bedtime is going to be, that's sort of the standard recommendation. But for some people, especially if you're waking up at night, it can be helpful to even have a little bit of protein before bed. So that could be like a little handful of nuts or seeds or a little turkey or something like that. It just helps to kind of stabilize the blood sugar and the hormones, and just creating a healthy sleep environment. So that's the same thing. Darkness at night, also coolness at night. The body, like I said, the temperature drops a little. So sleeping in a cool room is going to be helpful as well. And then also, avoiding having a lot of things and activities going on in the bedroom. Otherwise, we start to associate the bedroom with other activities besides sleep. So avoiding, a lot of electronics, or, trying to make the bedroom mostly just for sleep. So movement. I like to say movement because, exercise sort of, I think, creates this expectation that it needs to be going to a gym or doing something formal. But I think really, and the research supports this, is that moving our bodies in ways that we enjoy and that are accessible to us is really going to be the best way to go, because we're more likely to do it. And there is probably a benefit to enjoying the movement and activity that you do, rather than, kind of like sloshing through it and it's like, I got to do this in it, but I'm not enjoying it. So I wrote down evidence about walking, just because it's, most people are able to walk, and it's, free and all of that, and it's a nice way to get outdoors. But you feel free to, be creative. I think it's important to, like I said, do something that you enjoy. So think about other things, like dance, or there's a lot of great mind-body practices that are also movement. So things like yoga or tai chi or qigong, anything where we're kind of synchronizing the breath with our movement and also maintaining an awareness of the body. A lot of these traditional practices really have a lot of benefit to mental health in terms of research. And so, yeah, but back to walking, walking 150 minutes per week. So that'd be, about a half an hour on 5 days per week. It enhances our cognitive health and our concentration and our mood. It decreases the cortisol, that stress hormone. It increases endorphins, which are the feel-good hormones. And then, aside from mental health, it also supports our heart health and our metabolic health, reversing diabetes, and also benefiting strength, resilience, balance. So lots of great benefits to movement. I like to talk about this concept in Japanese. It's Shinrin-yoku, but it means forest bathing. And it's because it's just another way to think about being outdoors and being in nature that isn't so focused on, feeling like I have to move and be, really intense in my activities. But this is a nice way to combine being outside, maybe some movement if we're going for a walk, for example, and then also some of this other sort of mind-body technique of really, it means this practice of forest bathing. It really just means being in a forest environment or in an outdoor environment and engaging with our senses. So our sense of sight, looking at what's around us, sound, listening to what's going on in the environment, smell, especially not as much now. We don't have as many, smells when we're outside. But you can look at this photo and imagine, there could be some, the smells of the earth and the soil, the smells of the coniferous trees, the plants, and with that, on that topic of smell, they've even taken some of the extracts, like the essential oils, out of some of these conifers that are found commonly in Japan that are used in these forests with forest bathing, and just even had people smell the essential oil, and that also brought a benefit as well. So likely, there's a benefit to even just smelling some of these scents. And then, yeah, touch. What are we, experiencing in our body, and how do we connect as we're walking on the earth? And then taste. Don't always have a lot of taste when we're just out in nature, but it's a paying attention to what you're noticing with those different senses. And there's surprisingly a lot of research about the benefits of forest bathing. So these are just some of the big categories. It seems to help our cardiovascular function, our heart health, our metabolic health. So blood sugar and just how the body is making energy, our immune system, inflammation, again, which is, important for mental health, antioxidant status. So that's just, the body's ability, again, to repair itself, which is going to be really important in the setting of inflammation and mental health. And then also just other psychological, emotional factors, our overall emotional state, just our attitude, and then physical and psychological recovery if we're recovering from an illness or injury, and then anxiety and depression. So that forest bathing is really, an example of mindfulness. And so I'll talk just, briefly about what mindfulness is, because it is one of the techniques that is, likely going to be could be very helpful for a variety of different mental health concerns. So mindfulness, like the name suggests, and like this, I like this illustration. It's like the person walking and the mind is full. It's full of a million thoughts and thinking about the past and the future and what do I have to do? Or are we more like the dog where we're walking and we are, we're either thinking about walking or we're, not really thinking so much, but we're really just paying attention to what's going on. And so that's simply what it is. And I think it has become a very popular, almost like a trend. And a lot of what is sort of advertised as mindfulness, might not really be mindfulness. So anytime something becomes popular, it is used as a marketing tool. But I also think that the reason it's become popular is because it resonates with so many people. I think, a lot of us can resonate with this idea of, walking into a room and not remembering why we walked into the room, or being in a conversation with somebody and realizing that, we don't remember what they just said. So the mind it's what the mind does. The mind thinks, and it's very well adapted at, planning and problem solving. But it also can get out of control a bit sometimes. And our culture in this country, our society really doesn't support a lot of ways to slow down and to kind of connect with ourselves and reflect. So this is, one way to do that. It's based in the practice of mindfulness today, as practiced in the US, is based in Buddhist philosophy. It has similarities to a lot of different practices in a variety of traditions throughout the world. But it's really this, universal human capacity of being able to pay attention and notice what's happening, and really doing it with a specific attitude of curiosity and openness, and kindness. So, we could kind of think of this as just another way to become frustrated with ourselves if, we're working to pay attention and we notice that the mind is wandering, and it can become very frustrating. And so really the invitation is to approach it with more of an attitude of kindness to oneself, curiosity, and rather than judgment and criticism. And so this class, it's called the MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, it's an adaptation of this for a Western audience, and it's taught at hundreds of different medical schools and research and academic institutions now throughout the world. And at Beaumont, we do have the Beaumont Center for Mindfulness as well. And like I said, I'll talk about this next month if you're interested in learning more, and we'll do some practices too. But these are some of the things that research has really skyrocketed in the last several years. And so if you want to, you can pretty much look up any health concern, and there's probably been a study on mindfulness related to it. But these are some of if we look overall at different meta-analyses and, bigger research studies that are involving a variety of different studies in people, these are some of the ways that mindfulness can positively influence health. So it helps with our attention. You could kind of think of it almost as a training, because each time a lot of times we'll start by paying attention to the breath. And as soon as we do that, the mind will start to wander. And so it's this gentle and kind, just kind of guiding the attention back to the breath. And so it's really like exercising your muscles, but it's kind of like an exercise for your attention and for your brain. So it helps with our attention. It helps with emotional regulation and self-awareness. It really helps us to become more in touch with what's going on in our body and how to respond and make best decisions for ourselves, improving stress resilience and decreasing reactivity. And then the three big areas that it seems to help the most in terms of health outcomes are anxiety and depression, chronic pain of all types, and prevention and treatment of addiction. And then this is just I put this in here. It was a paper that came out late in 2020, but it's just to sort of illustrate that people are studying just this overall idea of well-being and mental health, and seeing that it's something that we have influence and agency over. It's, not as though we are depressed and we're just going to be a depressed person. It doesn't mean that it's, an easy thing to address, but that there are ways to that we do have the ability to influence a lot of these different aspects of our health. And so they kind of, in this paper, they named a few different areas that they thought were most important for overall well-being. So awareness, connection, insight, and purpose. And then they just kind of, went through and gave some different examples of how we might cultivate awareness. We might cultivate awareness through mindfulness, or we might cultivate more connection and support connection through gratitude, practicing gratitude and appreciation, or there's different types of meditation that are related to compassion, ways to gain insight into ourselves, our patterns. So self-inquiry or cognitive behavioral therapy is a technique that is used a lot, just to understand a bit more our thinking patterns and how that relates to our reactions. And then purpose, we talked about this a little bit, I think, with just the social connection and finding meaningful relationships, but also finding meaning in your life. And it doesn't have to be this grand purpose, but what are things that feel nourishing and meaningful to you. And then laughter. So I like to talk about this just because I think it's fun and it usually puts a smile on people's face, but laughter is pretty neat because a lot of the studies that they've done with laughter, you don't even have to be laughing at anything in particular. So they just will have somebody start laughing, and it is a little bit infectious. There's even something called laughter yoga where people will just laugh together, and infectious and contagious in a good way, that is. But yeah, so laughing, just the simple act of laughing stimulates the immune system. It does a lot of the same things with a lot of these other therapies have done, reduces the cortisol, the stress hormones, and inflammation. It can help with pain, anxiety, just overall well-being. And yeah, like I said, just the act of laughing alone improves mood and health. And then in terms of nutrition, there's a lot that could be said here. And I think, that could be a whole other talk on its own. But we usually, there's no one right way to eat for everybody. Everybody's different. And I think it's important for people to find a way of eating that they enjoy and that works for them in terms of, their culture and their values and, what's accessible to them and what's realistic. But just in terms of some basic principles in terms of supporting our mental health, omega-3 fats are going to be supportive to mental health. So probably the easiest way to get that is through fish like salmon, sardines, herring, Spanish mackerel. Those are the richest in the omega-3 fats. But for people that don't eat fish, you can also get omega-3 fats through flaxseed, chia seed, hemp seeds, and walnuts. And a lot of other plant foods have omega-3 fats. These are just the most concentrated sources, but the omega-3 fats are going to help to modulate inflammation in the body. Also, there's two different main omega-3 fats. There's EPA, which helps a little more with the inflammation, and the DHA, which is a little bit more important for cell membranes in the central nervous system. So that's going to be really helpful for, the brain and mental health as well. And, for example, pregnant women are recommended to take the DHA supplements, which is, typically a type of fish oil. And it's because it can help to prevent, it helps with the developing baby and development there, but it also can protect the mother and help to protect against postpartum depression. So, but omega-3 fats also great for depression in general. Also adequate protein. So I find a lot that when I ask about what people are eating, especially people with anxiety, but I see this sometimes with depression too, they might not be eating enough protein to really kind of help to keep the blood sugar stable throughout the day. And the blood sugar and the mood really can interact a lot because, if our blood sugar drops, oftentimes we will develop anxiety-like symptoms or even fatigue and depression-like symptoms. But so making sure that we're getting good protein throughout the day and, not skipping meals and that type of thing. I think for some people, they don't need to think about this quite as much, but especially, if somebody's struggling with a mental illness, I think adequate protein can be really helpful. B complex vitamins are important. So, it's like B1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and then, 9, B12. Most people are familiar with that, but those are all really important for, especially the B6, the B9, and the B12 are really important, and B1 too, for synthesizing and then breaking down our different hormones and neurotransmitters that relate to mood. And so we need enough B vitamins in order to make serotonin, to make melatonin, to make dopamine, but then, and those are all of the, different chemicals that relate to mood, but then we also need them to break down our stress hormones. So, and then if someone's, taking like an antidepressant medication, that can also sometimes lead to some depletion of these B vitamins. So it's a nice thing to take in addition. And then berries, it's just a pretty picture, but berries also, the dark red, the dark purple, blue, those are signs of polyphenols and these, different types of antioxidant compounds that are important for a variety of different health aspects. And more recently, and so they can repair inflammation in the body, but more recently we learned that a lot of these polyphenols are actually feeding some of the bacteria in our gut, and that that's actually the way that they lead to a lot of positive health benefits. And there's a big connection between gut health and brain health. So yeah, supporting the gut would be another important part of this. And then I won't spend a lot of time just because I want to leave enough time for questions, but it's not just about what you eat, but how you eat. And so food can cause a lot of stress for people as well. Eating disorders are very common. And so, I think that that's something that it's good to work with a professional on that, but also there are ways to find a more balanced relationship with food, and mindful eating or intuitive eating are some approaches to consider. And it's basically practicing non-judgment, practicing that kindness and curiosity, being in the present moment, and really being intentional about eating. And then I'm happy to talk about any of these therapies in more detail, but these are some of the different integrative therapies that are, usually taken as like a supplement, a capsule, or a tea, that have research to support them, supporting basically the stress response coming into more of a functional state. So we're not, creating too much stress hormones or not enough. So things like so L-theanine is the one on there that's more of it's an amino acid. It's more of an extract, and it is pretty concentrated in green tea. So if you like green tea or drink it, you may have noticed that it kind of creates this calm alertness, and some of that is probably related to the caffeine, but it doesn't have a whole lot of caffeine, and it kind of creates this sort of feeling of stability, and yeah, I think it's a great way to describe it, this calm alertness. And so green tea can do that, and then L-theanine is one of the compounds in green tea that likely is responsible for that action, so you can get it as a supplement as well. A few of my favorite herbs to support just overall mood. They can be helpful in the context of anxiety or insomnia, as well as depression. So ashwagandha, and the third or fourth one down, tulsi or holy basil. These are both really stellar Ayurvedic herbs, which is Ayurveda is the traditional medical system of the Indian subcontinent, and both of these are used for a variety of different conditions, but I tend to see them benefit people with anxiety and sleep issues, and also a very balancing action, so kind of not too stimulating, not too sedating. Rhodiola tends to help a little bit more in cases of more like chronic fatigue. So maybe more of like a depression picture, but all of these, have a role in different ways. And then lavender and bergamot are usually used more as like an essential oil, so an aromatherapy. And lavender has been studied a bit more for anxiety, chronic pain, insomnia, and bergamot a little bit more for depression. So with any of these, it's important to talk to your healthcare provider, because some of these will interact with medications. So I wouldn't, necessarily just recommend trying them all. But if you're taking medications or have any health issues, conditions, but yeah, these are some of the top ones that I use. And then I just have, some resources here for you as well. So I'm happy to take any questions.
I don't see any questions so far, Dr. Davila.
Okay.
If anybody has any questions, I don't see it anything.
Okay.
Wonderful
yeah, I just see in the
presentation.
chat. Oh, maybe you, okay, you responded to that. Okay, great.
Yeah, that was like last month's presentation. They were asking, so I just gave them the link.
Okay.
And it was a wonderful presentation and a very helpful information, Dr. Davila. We really appreciate it. And
yeah, you're very
it was
welcome.
great.
Yeah,
and
it's my pleasure.
And I like that laughter part as well.
Yeah.
That's a really good one. And I know, and a lot of people in our culture, they also say that we need to laugh and freely, then you reduce the stress.
Yeah.
And as when you were mentioning about ashwagandha and tulsi, like a holy basil, that is also, I'm very familiar with that. My father and my sister, they're all Ayurvedic doctors, so I'm very familiar with that. And
yeah.
tulsi, I have at home, tulsi at home here.
Oh,
I grow
great.
that.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
that holy basil, I have it at home.
Yeah. Yeah,
And,
it's great. Have you ever grown it?
I'm sorry?
Have you ever grown it in a pot?
Yeah. Yeah, and whenever it's a winter, I bring it home inside the house, and when summer, I take it out. But it's a very delicate plant. You got to be very, very careful to grow that. And now, actually, in winter, now it's dying a little bit. But when I take it outside, then I get a little bit of small plants. I may have to repot this time. I think I should not leave it like that, and because it needs a lot of sunlight and heat.
Yeah, that's great though
plant.
To hear that it would survive all winter. I didn't realize it would do that.
Yeah, no, I bring it inside because I grow it in a pot and bring it inside. And I don't see any.
So it looks like one person asked, is the library going to host the sleep program? So I could answer that. It's actually the department I work for, Beaumont Integrative Medicine, they're hosting it. So if you're interested, probably the easiest way would be to just call the Integrative Medicine Department, which the number is 248-964-9200. And that's in my talk as well. It might be posted on our website, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, and for that I can answer. Our library is not hosting any sleep program, but next month, Dr. Davila, again, she's going to give a talk on mindfulness and mental health, March 23rd, Wednesday, same time at 6:30. Please don't forget, go to our library's website calendar, and just before 2 weeks, then you will start. You can start registering for the program. I think that's all. Everybody appreciated your presentation, a lot of good comments. Thank you very much, Dr. Davila. We really appreciated having you here, and we all enjoyed your presentation. Very, very helpful information. I think I have to follow some of those points as well.
Yeah, me too. I know we all, forget from time to time, and it's all just a practice. And but there are a lot of great resources and supports out there.
Yeah. You have a great night.
Thank
you. Good night,
you,
everyone, and thanks for attending this program again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Uma, and thanks everyone for joining. It was a pleasure.